tell it where you record on this computer. Not just any computer, this computer. So we're going to talk a little bit about Advent, but Advent in and of itself really will kind of feed into our next chapter that we're going to be getting into, John chapter 6. First of all, just to be clear, Advent is not part of Christmas. Advent is not connected to Christmas. We tend to put those together over all of the years just because of where they're positioned. It marks the beginning season of a liturgical year. So in many respects, Advent is more significant in terms of, it would be comparable to New Year's. What happens on New Year's Eve, right? We go out and celebrate, but what is the tradition on New Year's Day?
To take hangover medicine.
Pardon?
To take hangover medicine.
Well, yeah, take hangover medicine. Yeah, drink your Bloody Mary so you can get going for the. Well, you're thinking maybe a little bit too religiously. Yes, we have all those spiritual feast days tied in there, but on New Year's Day, it's the beginning of the new year, right? So what is the tradition that we normally? Pardon?
New Year's resolutions.
Yeah, New Year's resolutions that we break by the end of the month. But the point of it is that New Year's points us what? To a new start, a new beginning, a new anticipation. We look at ourselves and we say, okay, I need to change this about me, so I'm going to make a New Year's resolution to do this. Well, that's really what Advent is. And even in terms of the liturgical year, it's about looking where we were in the past, but realizing that I need to be somewhere else. The impetus of Advent in and of itself really has its roots in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 15. And it's a passage that we have heard before because it is relative to what we have been saying here in John's gospel, in relationship to the fact that we are at the end of the first century. The world is in chaos at the end of the first century, and everybody is asking the question, who is this person that was among us? And so what John, the author of this gospel, is doing is taking us back to the prophecies, the prophets, specifically one of the major prophets. So Deuteronomy 18:15 is the passage that says, I will raise up from your kinsmen a prophet like me, or whatever. So for the Jews, the anticipation has always been for the Messiah. But the Messiah was to be the anointed one, right? But the Messiah in their mind was the anticipation of the one who is going to come and conquer the Romans or conquer whatever authority was there. And so they were waiting in anticipation of this. We, in the Christian tradition, have taken those old traditions of the Jewish, and we have now interspersed that into our Christian tradition, in the understanding that that Messiah is none other than Jesus the Christ, which, however, an Orthodox conservative Jew does not accept that Jesus was this Messiah they were looking for. They are still waiting in anticipation of that Messiah to come. This Sunday is the feast of Corpus Christi, Christ the King. So this actually begins again back in the Old Testament, right? Coming from the book of Samuel, coming from the Judges. The people are crying to God through Samuel and saying what? We want a king. God is telling Samuel, well, go back to the people and say, yeah, you don't really need a king. Everything's good. We're okay. And they said, no, we need a king. I mean, so we know the story, right? You can pick Isaiah up and put it on the book of Kings. We can go through that whole history of the kings, of the one bad king after another. Other than David, we have this really great king who wasn't without his own faults. In case you're wanting to condemn Pope Francis and say, well, Jesus picked 12 apostles and one of them betrayed him and the other one denied him 3 times. So they weren't all that great either. Humanity gets in the way, right? But think of it. When Jesus, as we move forward to 1 BC into 1 AD, Jesus becomes what? So how do we announce him? He not only is a king come into the world, but he is the what? He is the King of kings. So the word Advent itself means to come to move toward. Is there another, does that connect anything to you? To move toward, to come to?
The second coming, you mean?
Well, in the beginning was the Logos.
Oh.
The Logos was with God. The Logos was God. We remember we had that conversation that the way it is written in Greek, the way it was written in the Greek, it doesn't just mean the word, but it meant something that pointed toward. So the Logos points toward God. The Logos moves toward God. Advent means to come to arrive to. So in Advent, we are still coming to God, arriving to God. Advent it begins on the feast of St. Andrew, the Apostle. What is significant of that? That we read in John's Gospel, chapter 1. He was the what?
He brought Peter to him.
Say it again, Joe.
He brought Peter to Jesus.
Well, he did that because he's Peter's brother.
Yeah.
He was also acknowledged as the first apostle to follow Jesus. We don't know the name of the other apostle, right? When John the Baptist said, "Behold the Lamb of God," we know that Andrew was there and the other apostle, which they assume might have been John, just because. However, that really probably doesn't make much sense, considering if you go into Matthew or Mark and you realize that James and John were on the boat with Zebedee when Jesus called Peter over and said, "Hey, I'm getting in your boat, let's go fishing." And there were so many fish that Peter couldn't haul them in. So James and John got out of Dad's boat and went into Peter's boat. So it could be the other guy, but who knows? At any rate, Andrew was the first apostle. So Advent begins on the feast of St. Andrew, which is the first movement toward
A good golf game,
A good what?
golf game.
Yeah,
I just think St. Andrews.
yes, I'd pick St. Andrews any day, yeah. Yeah, absolutely, a great golf game, yeah.
I mean,
Sorry about
all of time has been Advent when you look at it like that.
Say it again? Jim?
All of time has been Advent. When you look at it.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah, so
Our
that's,
lives are spent.
so that's the picture I'm trying to paint to us, is that Advent isn't something about this short moment in time, that Advent has been coming from the beginning of creation
Mhm.
to that moment that we look to. And not only that, but Advent now is pointing beyond, right? Because now Advent for us is the anticipation of Christ coming again. Um,
When did the church start Advent? I mean, when did the history, what is the history of Advent in the beginning?
Well, that is a good question, and I cannot give you an answer to that because there is nothing that I have read anywhere that can state specifically that it began here.
Because it wasn't in the beginning of the development, was it? Obviously not, but I mean, as like even after the councils, was it?
Well, so yeah, so it began liturgically. So even like Christmas on December 25th, that got put there by one of the popes because he was trying to combat the pagan celebration of the Roman gods on December 25th. So this was Christmas on the 25th, liturgically was to replace for all Christians. Advent then became a liturgical as we move into the second, third, and fourth century, and the liturgy begins to get more identified. And as we move through all of these councils, then liturgically, but I haven't seen there may be one there in none of the reports that I have seen. It hasn't said.
What made me curious is that you said it wasn't necessarily for Christmas, getting ready for Christmas, like Lent was getting ready for Easter. I always thought that was it. I never thought of when did this start and why did it start? Yeah.
Yeah, well, so yes, liturgically, it did get put in to
Celebrate.
be in front of Christmas, but as its own season, like Lent really should be its own season, and then Easter is another season. But we tend to marry Lent to Easter like we marry Advent to Christmas. But Advent as a season, if we didn't even have Christmas, should stand on its own. Because Advent for us at this point is really the anticipation of eschatology or second coming, which doesn't make sense to me when the church says, don't put your creech out, don't put Jesus out, don't put him out, we're waiting for the birth of, and I'm going, no, he's already born. I think I've already said this with my children. Before their birthday, I don't go pick up all their pictures and put them away for 4 weeks and say, well, you're going to be born again on this day. Nicodemus is saying, oh, wait a minute, how can you do that? You can't go back into the mom's. I mean, so in a sense, that never made sense to me. I understand it's not get ahead of ourselves and get too far into Christmas beforehand, but done properly with the creech out, it just like a picture on the wall, seeing all of Katie's pictures up there on the wall, you look at them and they take you to those moments. They help you to be in the moment rather than being away from the moment. but I will continue to try to find that answer. Right now, there is not anything that I've ever read that I see in any notes. I didn't say anything about that last time. Do you have those notes?
Yes, I do have the notes. Let's see.
That where it said specifically,
The church.
but now I probably can go back liturgically. I never thought about doing that. I can go back liturgically to see when Advent became a liturgical. I will do that. That may give us the answer.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything in here. For
No,
dates.
because I don't ever remember saying that in the past either.
Yeah, I don't, and I reviewed them last night. I didn't see a date. It's kind of like I looked up the sign of the cross, not too long ago, and it was one of those things that just organically.
Right,
sort of
because-
happens, and there's not like in AD 450, this is when it started.
Well, because with the persecutions, the sign of the cross just became a thing as an identification that they could do silently.
So I don't see any dates
No,
here.
no, there, I don't have one, but
Yeah,
so, but what we do need to understand is that Christmas without Advent is like a cross without a corpus, or the resurrection without the crucifixion. If you understand what I'm trying to say. Now those are my own words. I'm not telling you I dragged that out of some scholar somewhere, but in my mind, the cross or the corpus on the cross, the two don't necessarily have to go together. But in regard to our Christian tradition, we in the Catholic faith look toward the crucifixion of Christ, or the cross with the corpus on it, because we are told what by Jerome, you cannot get to or Paul also, you cannot get to the resurrection without going through the crucifixion, or we can't get to the grace of salvation without going through the pain of suffering in that sense. So even though Advent is not, as a season, is not part of the Christmas season, the Christmas season would be lost or without Advent, because Advent is still anticipating what? That coming. It's anticipating what? Moving toward. So even though Christ has already incarnated in the world and came, his promise was that he would be coming back. And we then are called to continue to look toward that second coming. We are called to what? In the scriptures, we hear, don't let the oil run out of your lamps, be watchful. Well, that was to be watchful for the anticipation of Christ coming into the world incarnated, or the Messiah to come, right? But Jesus was telling us that for a whole other reason, to be watchful and to be ready when the second coming, or when the eschatology comes, that you won't be left wanting. Well, we know that there's going to be an end time somewhere, but for each of us, we all have our own eschatology. Pat Lyseek's eschatology happened this morning at 9 o'clock. So we pray that she was prepared and the oil was in the lamp, and that she was very watchful. Advent then is a time where it calls us to slow down, back up. It does have a little bit of a penitential feeling to it, but it's not Lent. Even though the colors of the vestments look like they should be Lent, it's really not Lent. But it's penitential in the very sense that we have to acknowledge the fact that without Christ incarnated into the world, we would not have been freed from our sinfulness. and that we need Christ to be free from our sinfulness, even today. And that we have to acknowledge that we are sinners and that we are broken from the Pope on down. And so Advent then is a time when we can pause, like we do at New Year's, to take a look at where are we? Where am I? Let's see, in our last prayer group, Bill had the question to us was, we had a choice between three different things. What is something that you need to let go of that you haven't? Or the second question is, what is something good that you need to incorporate into your life? Or the third one was, what do you, something about intentionality, why can't I remember it?
What do you intend to do with it?
Well, intentionality, so how are you with intentionality moving towards Christ? Not moving to Christ just by getting up in the morning and functioning in it. How are we intentionally becoming better disciples, better Christians? How am I intentionally increasing my faith? Those were three questions. And I thought, okay, those are three really good points to meditate on. What is it that I'm hanging on to that I need to let go of? What is it that I have avoided that I need to incorporate into? How am I intentionally coming to a deeper faith? Advent is this time that asks us to liturgically. I don't want you to think of it with the outcome of Christmas. That's just because of where it's placed, but that's what we tend to do, right? We think this movement is about getting us to December 24th or 25th. It's not about that. If we are not celebrating Christmas on the 25th, the questions would still be the same. What are you doing? How are you preparing? How are we deepening that faith? The scripture readings that we are going to be listening to. So the first couple of weeks, there are going to be all those eschatological readings, right? What the end is going to look like, what we can expect, the clouds opening up, the heavens breaking down, whatever. We're going to hear those. Then the second 2 weeks then are focusing on the coming of the prophet that was promised, the coming of the Messiah that was promised. So we will focus on those, which tends to make us want to do what? Tends to make us want to connect right to Christmas, right? We hear those readings and we're sitting here waiting, okay, trees up, house decorated, everything's ready to go, so let Christmas happen. Well, no, this is anticipating the incarnation. This is anticipating being freed from the bondage of our sinfulness. This is anticipating our needing to readjust our lives. Okay. Y'all can stop me at any time. You can, question, whatever. So Advent then calls us to recall the themes of a new light. All right, again, that connects right into John chapter 1, verse 5, right? John chapter 1, verse 5. Out of the darkness will come the light of the world. This is the message that the author of John's gospel is trying to tell his people. Even us right now, it might appear that we are living in a pretty dark period of time from a Christian faith, from what we see going on. Particularly, as Marianne says, if this second part of Biden's bill gets passed, how does that bode for religious freedom or anything else? But out of the darkness will come the light. And Romans chapter 1, verse 5 and verse 9. But Isaiah chapter 60, verse 19, the prophet expresses it. And it is one of the things that the Jews have been waiting for and looking for.
Say the chapter again.
Pardon me?
The chapter.
Isaiah 60, verse 19. We can even begin with verse 18. No longer shall violence be heard of in your land, or plunder and ruin within your boundaries. You shall call your walls salvation and your gates praise. No longer shall the sun be your light by day, nor the brightness of the moon shine upon you at night, even though we had that great moon with the lunar eclipse. Shine upon you at night. The Lord shall be your light forever. Your God shall be your glory. No longer shall your sun go down or your moon withdraw, for the Lord will be your light forever, and the days of your mourning shall be at end. So John 1:5, out of the darkness will come the true light. And it's going to shine through all the darkness that appears to be in front of us right now. We can't see our way out of the darkness because we can't see what God can see. We don't know what God knows. We can ask the question, why did Ben's wife have to go into the hospital early, and what was the point of this? But God knows and is in control and sees way beyond where we can see. We may not ever know some of those actions until baby Judah is 20 years old and is doing something, and all of a sudden you go, oh, now I could have had a V8. Now I get it. Now I get it. So the Advent wreath, when we look at the Advent wreath, it symbolizes God the Father. So when you make your Advent wreath, or you have your Advent wreath, the wreath, how does it symbolize God the Father? Well, the circle, no beginning, no ending, right? The Alpha and the Omega. So the wreath in itself, and so the light from the four candles remind us that Christ is in the world. Again, John chapter 8, verse 12, when we get there, we will get this from the Gospel of John. There are three violet and a rose. Each candle, the light on each candle represents 1,000 years. And it symbolizes the 4,000 years that humanity waited for the Messiah to come to the world. If you think you've been waiting a while, the Jews waited 4,000 years from the time that Deuteronomic prophecy was made until, and if you are a conservative Orthodox Jew, you are still waiting. So it's been 6,000 years and they're still waiting.
So their Advent wreath has 6
It's,
candles.
yeah, well, it gets bigger by the, yeah. So the 4 weeks of Advent, the first Sunday symbolizes hope. The prophet's candle, reminding us that Jesus is coming, or at least going back to Deuteronomy 18:15, right? A prophet like me will come from your kinsmen, that anticipation of that Messiah. So the first week of Advent, if you, in your meditation, just think of the word hope. Where in the world is your hope lying? Where do you see your hope? What do you have to let go of to have hope enter in? Or what do you need to bring into to let hope shine? How are you going to intentionalize hope in your life? Where will you find that? The second Sunday symbolizes faith with the Bethlehem candle, reminding us of the journey that Mary and Joseph had to take to Bethlehem. So the faith that we are going to talk about, or that we will hear, we literally understood that faith from John chapter 2, right? What was John's Gospel, chapter 2? The wedding feast of Cana, and that whole passage there was about what? Faith. So in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. All things came to be through him. Without him, nothing comes to be. So what is the message of John in this gospel to the people at that time, to you and I? We need to hear the Word. We need to trust the Word. We need to believe in the Word. And we need the Word to lead us to faith. That's the whole of John's Gospel. Everything we are reading in John's Gospel, that is it. We just finished John chapter 5, right? Jesus is saying, you want a sign, but I'm giving you the signs, and I'm giving you the words. You want the witnesses, I'm giving you the witnesses, but you don't listen to them, you don't accept them, you reject anything that I'm giving you. But who didn't? Mary didn't. She didn't at the fiat of the angel coming to her and saying, Hail Mary, full of grace. And she didn't at the wedding feast of Cana when she said, do what he says. Because she understood that all you needed to do was trust what he told you to do, even if you don't understand it. Do what he says. Well, fill up 6 jugs of water. I just sat there and go, how's that going to get us more wine? How's that getting us more wine? You know, just do what he says. That's all you have to do. So the second Sunday, the symbolization of faith. Joseph and Mary were told that they need to go to Bethlehem. They just get on a donkey, pregnant as the day is long. From Galilee. Has anybody been? Have you been to the Holy Land yet? You were going to go, right? Hopefully you're going to get there. It's a 2.5 hour ride from Galilee to Jerusalem. It's about another 45 minutes, and you have to go through a checkpoint into Palestinian territory to get to Bethlehem. This was not some little cakewalk on a.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Sometimes, I've never been to the Holy Land. It's a bucket list thing. And when we talk about Bethlehem here, it conjures up, thoughts of just, this magical era, this magical time. We see it on, Christmas cards and movies, and we hear it in songs our whole life. Does going to Bethlehem and seeing the reality of a modern type situation, does that diminish that sort of romanticism of old Bethlehem?
No, in fact, well, it didn't for me. For me, going into Bethlehem and actually sitting in caves where most likely this birth, well, in fact, the church where Jesus was born, there's a church built right over the top of it. And when you go in, you have to crawl down some really short steps pass, and you get to look through a glass on top down onto the manger and whatever. But so that doesn't give you a sense of it. But we had mass in one place where inside of a particular cave that looks very similar to, and the shepherds back then, they called them mangers because it might have been a cave, but that's where they set it up for the animals. So, and then it was really, I mean, so we're down there, and Denise and Cyril were with us. And so then in the middle of that, they started singing, and we started singing Oh Holy Night and Silent Night and a few other, and so it became very real.
Wow, wonderful.
What actually made it probably really so is they picked out a Christmas song, and you're sitting on nothing but rocks, and it was not very warm out with big stones, so it's kind of cold in there, and we weren't the only group in there. There were probably groups from 3 other maybe places, but then when they started to sing the song, when one ended, somebody else started singing in a different language. And then they would sing in this language, and when that one was over, they would start singing the same song in another language.
And then we all sang the same song,
Same
all
song.
together, all in the different languages.
Yeah, it was just kind of community.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
That just threw back in my mind that we found, okay, we have these modern situations. And I regularly go to the Jerusalem Post, so I'm reading about troubles and turmoil, and so to hear that, gosh, that is wonderful. That is fantastic.
Well, and the trip from Galilee to Jerusalem is relatively flat, and there's a lot of olive trees and whatever along the way and whatever, but Bethlehem, not so much. Bethlehem pretty much looks like the hill country. So, not that it was just an easy. But anyway, the second week of Advent is the Bethlehem candle, faith, the faith that Mary and Joseph had when they took it. The third Sunday symbolizes joy, the joy, the shepherd's candle, the joy that the shepherds had when they came to the manger and saw, instead of what they would normally have seen, yes, there were some animals there, but to see a child, and in their mind, not really completely, totally understanding the magnitude of this child laying in this manger, but seeing this child in this manger.
I think I mentioned before, I read the poem of the Man Garden. Something that stays in my mind thinking about that is, they said that when Mary and Joseph were on the way to Bethlehem, they stopped to rest, and the shepherds were there, and they brought her milk. And then one of them they knew that the place was crowded and they may not find room. So one of the shepherds went with them, and they found this cave, and that's where Mary and Joseph went. So when they were announced that the baby's been born, they knew exactly where she was. But so these are things that are pleasing to me to think about. And I don't know that you.
Well, the poem of the Man God is a private apparition, just like many other apparitions. So the church looks at them and to see whether they go against doctrine or don't. And if they don't, but it's a private. So yes, I've read the poem of the Man God. So there's the difference.
I like that story.
It does give a little comforting to it, albeit it also wants to remove from it some of the angst or anxiety that maybe Joseph and Mary experienced, because again, in some of the commentaries in relationship to the poem of the man God, and not just the poem of the man God, there are other. In fact, from on the way down from Galilee to Jerusalem, they do stop and point out that this is a place where Joseph and Mary probably had a respite. And those were marked and whatever. And to that point, yes, they would have been able to get some kind of help or nourishment or whatever. But some of the commentaries are, we have to be careful that we don't want to remove from this any of the struggle or any of the,
It never did that for me.
it
It just makes it.
yes, that's what those do. They give you nice, warm, fuzzy feelings, and they help, I think, in many respects.
Yeah, I knew the sister I'm thinking about having a birth in a cave. But anyway, I thought that.
Well, I can't even imagine giving birth at that time, any place, anywhere, but
Wow.
so we have the shepherd's candle, the lambs, but then again, the lambs, again, remembering the Lamb of God, or going all the way back to the sacrifices that begin even with creation, even in Genesis, the sacrifice of the animals. But so the joy, then the third Sunday is the rose candle, right? So it takes the first two Sundays, the hope and the faith, and it connects them to the joy. And so we have the joy of the cross. So one of the beautiful things about the play Jesus we saw in Branson, Marge told you, was that at the time of the crucifixion, they were also doing the Christmas scene, or the birth of Christ and Mary's Magnificat. But in the birth is the joy of the cross. So as we move into Christmas, rather than getting all caught up in the bright lights and the hoopla and the whatever, that our intentionality of the joy in the rose colored, in the shepherds, in the lamb, is to see the joy in the cross, which sounds contradictory, but we know the reality. The fourth Sunday symbolizes peace, with the angel's candle reminding us of the angel's message of peace on earth, goodwill toward all. It said men, but so the evergreen on the wreath reminds us of the eternal life with Christ, because again, evergreen trees, they just stay evergreen. The holly represents the crown of thorns from the passion of Jesus, and the pine cone symbolizes Christ's resurrection. Because the seeds that are inside the pine cone, that the pine cone distributes to continue new life all the time. So the wreath then reminds us of the immortality of our souls, of our life in Christ. It's the promise of everlasting life to us through Christ, or the Messiah that is coming. The last thing, and I'm pretty sure that this is different than any of the notes on Advent than John has. So I'm giving you an updated 2021 version, I guess. But
this is great. This is awesome.
But we tend to, in our intentionality, we tend to miss a huge part of Advent. And that part of Advent is Joseph. We do not necessarily connect Joseph to Advent, because he tends to come to us at a later time. But Joseph himself is a part of the Advent story. Joseph himself is the symbol of faith, but not only just faith, but he's the symbol of humble faith. in the sense that Joseph is a part of this Advent story. He has been, just as Mary has been anticipated to be the new Ark of the Covenant, Joseph was anticipated to be the protector, the guider of Mary.
In the poem of the man God, that is brought up. Joseph is, he takes his coat that keeping him warm and puts it on Mary.
Yeah.
He builds a fire in front of the cave, and he's, there's so much of Joseph with the scene in the cave that, he was so protective of her that, anyway.
No, yes, absolutely, absolutely. So I'm just going to read this to you just so I can make sure that I cover the whole thing, because when I tend to just give it from my head, I look back and I'm going, oh, I missed that. Oh, I forgot that. Oh,
Well, we're sitting over here going, gosh, I can't believe he remembers all this. So,
So the Holy Patriarch appeared to be a model of all the virtues. He was righteous, that is to say, embellished with all the virtues and stainlessness. Eusebius of Caesarea, one of the early, thought, he's an early historian, okay, just like Josephus, thought that we noticed a great freedom of thought and incomparable modesty and prudence that was on par with his modesty. Above all, he was very devout, and his extraordinary beauty attracted people's attention. Joseph was the purest virgin man. He was also the one that was the most deeply humble and the most fervent in the love of God, the most contemplative and the most attentive in serving the Virgin Mary as his wife. As soon as the angel announced to him that the child that Mary was waiting for came from God, he submissively bowed down, did not look for a reason for the miracle. He unhesitatingly and without delay believed it. As soon as he woke up, he did what the angel commanded him to do. A commentator, Jacques Benger-Bousset, explained that in this way, he surpassed Abraham's faith, for Abraham believed only in a sterile woman giving birth, whereas Joseph believed in a virgin who would give birth to a child. So in other words, to this particular author, it took more faith to say, okay, a virgin is pregnant and going to give birth than a woman who was just sterile could give birth and whatever.
And that is the other thing in the poem of the man God, when Joseph had that meeting with the angel telling him, he went to Mary and he got on his knees and he begged her forgiveness for not believing, and he cried. I mean, that was very touching to me also. And when I think about it, he was just so loving.
So it would be interesting, Joe, to compare the stories of the man God to the book we're now reading on Joseph, which is another private apparition. Yes, yeah.
The thing that comes to mind when you say faith, I connect trust to, he has such trust.
Yes. Well, and so they're encyclical, right? They go hand in hand. Trust leads to faith, faith leads to trust, right? So you can't have the one, or, the cross leads to salvation, or the resurrection draws on the cross. So, bye, Luann.
Bless you, Han. Say hi to Jay for us.
Yeah.
Jay.
So Joseph did not witness any of Jesus' miracles. He died before Jesus entered into his ministry. But he knew only about human nature's weakness. He saw Jesus as a small and frail and dependent child who were dependent on his parents in all his needs. He worked by his side as a simple craftsman. Humiliation, weakness, powerlessness, infirmity, so many needs did not shake his faith, a faith that was, all that being said, exceptionally firm, expansive, and enlightened. So one can say that Joseph did unite, one can say that what Joseph did united him in altogether special way to Mary's faith. So in Mary's caveat of faith to the angel Gabriel, that Joseph's faith was already connected to Mary's faith. That in the advent of anticipation of the Messiah into the world, Joseph's faith was connected to Mary's faith. He accepted as truth the coming from God, the very thing that she already accepted at the Annunciation. One of the councils taught the obedience of faith must be given to God as he reveals himself. Man freely commits himself entirely to God through this faithful obedience. This is the story we've been talking about in John's Gospel, right? Faithful obedience to the word. If you hear the word, you have faith and you are obedient to the word, then you will find your salvation. He fully submits his intellect and will to God, who reveals himself and willingly assents to the revelation that he gives. Well, that's a message you get from the man God, but that's a message that comes strongly through the book that Joe and I and Carol Eubank, and I don't know if anybody else is reading it or not, but
What's the name of it? What's the name of that?
it's just called Joseph.
And it's Sister B-A-J-I.
Oh yeah, I can't.
Cecilia, B-A-G-I.
Yeah, so
I've
this,
been reading it for about a year now.
so that, well, it's pretty impacted, but this is a nun who apparently also was given apparitions.
1700s, yeah, they found it. She kept it hidden.
Yes, in fact, the church only just recently opened it up to be,
They'll-
So is
But we
it
read
just
it,
one
we
volume?
read a chapter at a time and then discuss it, so it's taking us,
I'd like to read it.
Carol Eubank. Carol Eubank, okay.
so a final thing, we can move on. On Christmas night then, Joseph, while taking the newborn baby in his arms, did not hesitate to recognize that he was the Son of God. He recognized the uncreated wisdom of this word that the Father pronounced. In other words, how did Mary conceive? Through the word of God, through the messenger of the angel. The word, right in the beginning was the word. You see, I'm hoping you're getting the threads. I don't want us to think that what we're talking about here is disconnected from everything we've been talking about with John's Gospel. He recognized the uncreated wisdom of this word that the Father pronounced in an eternal today in this newborn child, this baby. His faith broke through the appearance and penetrated into the divine. During his adoration, he became aware of the ministry that he was going to practice. God entrusted his Son to him to take care of him. So, that's my new treatise on Advent to get you.
Thank you.
Yeah, isn't
Very
that
much.
awesome? That's wonderful.
I mean, we can't expect anything else, but how perfect God's plan is. The choice of Joseph, the choice of Mary, just how all of this is tied together, just like the people in the cave singing in different languages. I mean, it's all perfectly fitting.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit like what Katie was saying when we came in and said the house is beautiful. And then she said, well, yeah, while they were in New York, they got this architect, they had this vision, they saw the property and whatever. Well, you begin with an idea, right?
Yeah.
But somebody can take that idea and they can see something way beyond that idea. So even though, you know, like my dad was a contractor, I worked with him for many years, you know, it took me a while, but you know, here's these blueprints, they're all on these, you know, and my dad's looking at all these things and he can see the whole house and I'm looking at him going, what in the world?
Right, right.
Just tell me what I'm supposed to do today, you know,
That's a very
it's
Joseph thing to do.
way beyond my scope of understanding.
That big
But he was able to see the end, what that was all going to look like. But then the people who we were building, they had to trust. They had to trust that what was on that paper and what he saw was going to come to that in the end, what they were going to get was what they anticipated. Well, that's really kind of the story that we're talking about here, is that we somehow have to trust that, and from the time you talk to the architect and that drawings get on the paper, once they start digging a hole, it's chaos and a mess until you unlock that door and walk through with the keys and say, okay, you're home. And then even then, there are little glitches and you're going, well, what in the world were they thinking? You know, blah, blah. But so in a sense, you know, if there's an image to parallel, but so Advent, you know, what is it that I'm hanging on to that I need to let go of? Or what is it that I need to incorporate into my life that I have failed to do? What is my intentionality? You know, so we have hope, we have faith, we have joy, and then we have the candles, the shepherds.
You know, that's kind of a reworking of the CW card with the 3 things to talk about, you know, in the paragraph.
Yeah,
It's like he just, you know.
yes. The first question is, how have I deepened my relationship with Christ? The second one is, what have I read, studied, heard to display my charisms and my gifts? And the last one is, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah. Right, right.
He mentioned Father Ty mentioned it, the renewal of CW yesterday at Mass. No, it wasn't CW. He did say, he talked. It was that one that the Spanish. No, but he actually said CEW. Has anybody ever attended? And I didn't raise my hand, of course. Just that lady down front. Yeah. I thought it was that one that the men have been doing, the Spanish men. Which is church, right? And
Sure.
that which they're gonna do Christian for women. Because he said it's 2 separate groups, men, women. Yeah, but it's church. I'm sorry, I misheard. Yeah,
Well,
I could have heard wrong too.
whether you do
I was
Chirp or Acts or the Road to Emmaus or CEW, they're all they all have the same goal, purpose. in mind.
Yeah, God really
And those
appreciate
are still figuring it out.
what you've done today.
You know, they're figuring it out.
Yeah.
I'm in a really tough spot,
Yeah, that's, yeah, right.
and I'm getting
Those
it
in
from
between.
my family. Now it's my children. And I need to hang on to my faith.
Yeah.
I need to. And it's just it's a hard time, and these notes are gonna help me a lot. They're only gonna help me. I'm not trying to.
We can that's all we can do. We can pray for the others, but we can only do what we can control. And the only thing I can control